as a quick background, I'm a reformed software developer. Got my comp sci degree way back when kind of thing, and learned early on software development, developing solutions is very much part of technology, but more about the people and the processes, what makes it interesting. Today, we're going to talk about risks in use of AI in healthcare. As we go through this, I am a huge proponent of using AI in healthcare, but there are definitely risks associated with it. So, quick showing of hands, how many people use Gen AI, large language models, in their day-to-day work? That's pretty good, I'm impressed. As I walk around various conferences and talk to different people and ask that question, there's a lot of just, I'm not really impressed with what it does, but you need to use it. You need to understand it and experience it to figure that out. So let's talk about risk. From a healthcare perspective, we know we have lots of challenges, plagued with inefficiencies, out of control costs, disparities. We have mental health, obesity crises. I've heard someone say we can't birth our way out of the problem of the healthcare challenges. We just don't have enough people. So how can we apply the tools, the technology to help overcome these challenges? I think AI, and particularly machine learning, I think of that as the forgotten AI. Everyone in the last 2 years is really talking about large language models and what it can do, but there's also, we have to remember, machine learning has lots of capabilities. That also has risks inherent in it, which we'll see in a minute. But it's an opportunity to improve our efficiencies, to provide better care. So some of the overhyped risks, in my opinion, first is the ethics statement. So there's definitely ethical challenges. I'm not saying there aren't ethical challenges. There is a significant impact to using these solutions. People are falling in love with Gen AI solutions. I just rewatched the movie Her. 10 years ago, and watching it today, I was just like, wow, we're there, which is just amazing. So there's definitely ethics involved in this, but as I get involved in projects with various different organizations and projects, one of those first early things is let's create an ethics statement. I'm like, okay, we know there's an ethical challenge, so let's not worry too much about the writing an ethics statement. So I think that's a pretty overhyped risk from my perspective. Interestingly, I've been talking with Glenna Crooks, who was a health policy wonk for Ronald Reagan back in the 80s. She worked for Merck in the early 90s, global director of vaccines. Now she does a lot of consulting, but she just created, and it was released yesterday, a Hippocratic oath for using AI in health. So I'd advocate everybody go take a look at the oath.ai. Trying to get the word out about that. I provided some feedback on that, but it's just that. It's a Hippocratic oath for individuals to take instead of an ethics statement. I like it as a much better approach. The other thought is explainability. There's a lot in large language models. Even the researchers that developed the technology were surprised at what it was capable of early on. I'm surprised every day when I'm using it, some of these things that it comes out with. I'm not so much worried about explainability for the reason that when I go to my physician and I talk to him and he comes up with an idea or explains my situation, I'm not sitting there thinking, how did he come up with that idea? And so that's why it's like this large language model that we humanize in so many ways. I don't think we truly have to understand and explain how it got to that conclusion. We have to be able to understand that. So it's good from a research perspective to understand and learn that, but from that day-to-day, I'm not too worried about the explainability aspect of it. Likewise with transparency and patient consent. A lot of noise, I'll call it, out there in the world about getting specific patient consent on the use of AI. I think today that's a little overhyped because we shouldn't be using the AI without the doctor, without the healthcare practitioner in the middle of it. And that's why it's like patient consent, let's not worry about that. There's bigger problems and challenges to worry about. Transparency, I think, is important. And there's various different movements out there to create these model cards. CHAI, the Coalition for Health and AI, a couple weeks ago, just put out their version of this model card, which is the understanding to share how an AI algorithm was developed. In a lot of cases, unless you have a PhD in AI, you're not understanding what's written in this model card. So we have to sort of dumb that down, make that easier to even be able to get to patient consent. A key part of that patient consent is being informed and understanding that, well, if the physician that's using that AI can't explain that model card to the patient's not going to be able to consent. Not saying it's not an issue, but it's a little overhyped. Hallucinations. This is the last in the category of overhyped things. It is a challenge. It is a risk. The idea that an AI can come up with something that is not true. We have to be aware of that. We have to be knowledgeable of that. But we also have to accept the technology for where it is today. It is mind-blowing what it can do today. What it can do 2 years from now, 5 years from now is going to be even more incredible. So let's accept what it can and build the systems and processes around it to factor that in. Let's look at a few key stats here. I did a search of Perplexity AI, came up with a bunch of different stats on this very topic. 3.7% error rate in glucose data entry, 14% of those essentially dangerous, 7.4% error rate in speech recognition transcriptions. There's a big, huge case for the Gen AI systems now are ambient listening. So when you're in that patient encounter, instead of the doctor trying to take notes or a scribe trying to take notes, let the computer do it. Let it listen to the audience, just like it's doing your Teams meeting, your Google Meet meetings, it's taking notes for you. And after you review that, you can reduce it down to a 0.4% error rate, so that's pretty good. 9% average transcription error rates in patient encounters. And the last was a large review, tens of thousands of reviews. 1 in 5 patients who review the medical records found mistakes. 40% classified these mistakes as serious. The interesting part about this is not AI. This is people. This is humans making mistakes. So when we talk about making, what is the Gen AI doing? What kind of mistakes can? We are not perfect either. So we have to acknowledge that it does make mistakes. How do we deal with those and move forward? We do it every day. I think some underappreciated risks are bias in data. So everybody's aware it's a bias, but part of why I see it as underappreciated, where did that bias come from? It came from us. It came from us as humans in doing this data entry. All sorts of biases, so racial, gender, socioeconomical, historical, interpretation. We're the ones that are generating this data and putting the bias in that information. So the more and more we can be aware of that, and as we're doing data collection, we're using that data in various machine learning projects, the more we're aware of that bias in data and use the AI systems to address that bias, we have a huge opportunity there. Because if you have a data set, you can put that into systems and ask it to help identify biases. So we can use this technology to do just that. And as I've engaged in AI projects over time, it's very interesting because there's a lot of discussion of like, how do we do this AI? Do we use machine learning? What algorithm do we use? Do we need our ethics statement? And it's the very first question is, well, what about your data? You really have to understand your data before you even get to the AI aspects of it. Related to that is transferability. So there's a challenge now as we develop, particularly these machine learning algorithms at one institution and move it to another institution. They tend not to work as well at that second institution. We've seen this in various examples. So imagine you're collecting data, developing machine learning language at an academic top-tier medical center in Boston, in New York, in Philadelphia, wherever you may be. You develop that machine learning algorithm and then move it to a community health center in Alabama. They are not going to have the same quality of data to be able to use that machine learning algorithm. So as these algorithms move out and try and be adopted by more and more institutions, the better off we'll be if we understand those biases in the data and understand that transferability. The FDA said this is a challenge. They don't have the capacity to look at all of these systems, and that there has to be some shared model in terms of accountability. Likewise with data commercialization, seeing more and more institutions that are taking their data, wrapping it up and selling it to various researchers, to startups making it part of their incubator programs. I completely understand the need to make money. These companies need to stay, health systems need to stay in business to provide the care. But unless we democratize that data and get it out there such that different institutions can use that, address these biases, address the ideas of transferability, we're going to have challenges. Accountability is just that. The prior speaker was just talking about who's accountable for these applications, the systems that are being developed. One of the interesting things that I just came across, which is going to change this conversation, in the EU, they passed legislation called the Cyber Resiliency Act. It's in effect now. The industry has 3 years to react to it and get everything in line. But it is making the developers of the systems, and this is outside of healthcare, this is developers of any digital system, accountable for the outcomes of that software, changing the conversation. So it's not here yet. It's going to be a while before we see something like that in the US, but it is in place in the EU. You need to be aware of it. They're changing the conversation, even including open source, where open source is a little more nebulous as to who the owner is. They have specific documentation in there around the idea of open source. The last challenge is really accountability. I think it's, or slow adoption, slow adoption. It's, we're talking about wanting to see more and more people generate the evidence that these systems work. Well, when we talk about a sales cycle of 18 to 24 months, it's really hard to get into these health systems. So how can we accelerate the adoption of these systems to try and get the information out there to generate that advice? So really looking forward to how we can do that and use the power of it. Because ultimately, use of AI in healthcare is not without risk, but AI enables a return to doctors being doctors, nurses being nurses, and a return to people caring for people. Thank you.